Welcome back, folks. Thanks for joining us again for our guest artist series. My name is Grace, and today I have the pleasure of Jenna Damberger joining us. Jenna, thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Jenna is one of the Shakespeare and Delaware Park costume designers. So today we're going to talk to her about her experience behind the scenes, working on costumes, and how she makes all of the magic happen for us on stage. Jenna, let's start by talking about the difference between period Shakespeare and non-period Shakespeare concept shows. How does that change your approach to the design?
Well, when we say period Shakespeare, generally, we're talking about the Elizabethan period, which is when Shakespeare wrote. However, a lot of his productions were not necessarily set in Elizabethan England. So almost every show that is done is a period show. So when we do a historically based costume design, there are all of the research that goes into the types of clothing that people wore and the undergarments that people wore, like corsets and farthingales. So strict Elizabethan design is different because that's your set of rules. But if you are doing a timeless piece, okay, what does that mean? And you gather in different elements that inspire you and create your own vocabulary. So all design is period-based, whether it's contemporary or Elizabethan. Finding ways to make the actors feel comfortable with the clothing that they're wearing as soon as possible is a big thing, particularly when people are wearing corsets or restrictive things like ruffs. That can be a hard thing to get used to. I try to get shoes and corset and hoop skirts in as soon as possible to rehearsals. So understanding what the clothing is going to do to movement is a big thing, and it's kind of a driver, I think, for a lot of directors and designers as they start the whole process of design.
It's always so exciting to see how a show can take on a different feel depending on the costumes, because we're so visual and the costumes aid so much in telling the story, obviously. So as a designer, how do you approach the script differently than an actor would approach their script?
I like to think that I approach a script similar to how a director would approach a script, because you have to understand the overall picture. And then I also do a separate read. Like I read the first time just to familiarize myself. And then I do another read through that is like all the imagery that's in there. Anytime color is referenced, anytime a specific costume or thing is referenced, or like, okay, this piece needs to be shredded and then we need to see it whole again tomorrow. I also note all quick changes or changes in general. I track the time of the piece from scene to scene. Okay, does this whole play happen over a day? And what does that mean? Or does it happen over 6 months, a year? From scene to scene, all of that is super important so we can track time.
Just going off of that, then I guess, how do you use costumes to differentiate characters in terms of dynamics of, status and their type of role? How do you convey that through the costumes?
Generally, I start with socioeconomic status. The first thing I think about is, where does this character shop? Where are they buying their clothes? How are they getting their clothes? What kind of stores would they go to? Do they shop every month, or do they shop once every 10 years? Do they buy things at thrift stores? Do they get hand-me-downs? All of those things are and then I try and dial it backwards into when it comes to period stuff. We as an audience understand a lot of contemporary clothing because we see it all the time, and we have all these subliminal things that we assume about people even if we don't consciously do it. So historical based or fantasy based has a little bit more wiggle room, which is nice because we don't necessarily as a layperson know, oh well, that is definitely what it's saying about this person. I try to take what I know of the historical period and say, okay, well, this person is a working class person. They're going to use these kinds of fabrics. They only have such and such dyes available to them. And so we would have to do that. And that's a strictly historical piece. Now, the thing where it comes in that's fun is to layer in a color palette or a design element to a historical costume. So we have the shapes that existed in the period, but we are going to apply a color palette or use contemporary prints or mix it up that way. That's where I love to design.
This is so exciting because, come performance, we see the final product, and it's so cool to hear about everything that goes into the background of it. Let's hop to Shakespeare in Delaware Park stage. How does an outdoor venue influence how you approach your designs?
So being outdoors is uniquely challenging in that you have to take into account mud and daylight through half the piece. So the color of a piece is really influenced by lighting design. I try and get color swatches and actual garments to a lighting designer early in the process so that, that beautiful pink gown doesn't become a brown, sad color, because that happens sometimes. So being able to find things that are equally pleasant under natural light and the light that actually happens as the sun sets over the lake, that's a different color. So that's a big thing. Durability is a big thing. And it's like a practical concern that is outside of necessarily a design standpoint. It's wanting to balance what you ideally see, but with the practical challenges that are in place. Our actors climb the hill. So that's mud, dirt, grass that you're not necessarily walking on stage. It's a whole different ballgame. And making concessions to that, I think, is important, but trying to use those restrictions as an opportunity is another way of looking at it. Because we have that distance from the very top of the hill, we want to be able to see clear differences of the actors as they are on stage. So sometimes that means exaggerating trim or exaggerating color, but they also have to look good from right here as, they walk the hill. So trying to find that balance so that we can help the people at the top of the hill understand and track who we're looking at. I try to do that by keeping actors in the same color as they change costumes, that like each of the 4 ladies last year had a color and all of their costumes were in that color.
It's funny, you sit on the hill and you're sitting on a hill, but you don't think about the fact that you're sitting on a hill, and you have to, like, your job is all about that hill, like you said, because of the dirt and the mud. I know you're fairly new to the Shakespeare family, but do you have a favorite experience?
I loved Labor's Lost last year. That was one of my favorite shows I've worked on. I love that period. And I layered on John Singer Sargent. He did a whole watercolor series in this time frame. And so I got to incorporate all the watercolor images that he had, which is where our color palette came from. My actual favorite thing was doing the found pieces for the armor. We were trying to figure out, okay, this group of clowns decides to put on a play like 3 hours before they do. So what are these 5 bumbling men going to find to do this? And so he's like, yeah, let's just do found objects and things. Like, they shouldn't be wearing armor. So I said, okay, well, everybody's got a tablecloth. Everybody's got sheets. And so we made togas and tunics and stuff out of vintage sheets. And then we just bought a house, and I inherited a whole bunch of vintage household goods that were just really interesting to look at. And so I said, my assistant Brenna and our apprentice Katie, we just went through all of the stuff in my house, and I found washboards and this old metal colander and braising dishes. And I said, okay, what can this be? And how can we evoke this like Greco-Roman armor feel? So we made armor out of a washboard, and I made armor out of a baking tin, a muffin tin with like little shoulder pads. And we just kind of cobbled it all together. So night 2 of tech, and they all just walk out onto stage, and Steve, Allie, the props artisan, and I were just sitting next to each other, and they walked out and we just died laughing. It was fantastic. I think those muffin tin armor might be my absolute favorite thing. And then Tom Laughlin, I had joked with him backstage that we gave him washboard abs, and he ad-libbed that into the actual production. That was my favorite thing. When he said washboard abs on stage, it made my heart sing, because, it was a hilarious joke. Everybody loved it. And the 2 of us made that happen together. And that was really exciting.
That's amazing. That's so fun. Well, thank you so much for coming out and sharing with us this morning, the behind the scenes. It's always fun to see and hear about the different elements that go into making the show, especially the costumes. So we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experiences with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you folks for tuning in. If you like what you saw and heard, like and share and tell your friends about us.